With the launch and success of Marvel Rivals, it got me thinking, as a DC fan, what would a DC Rivals look like? Hey Internet, I'm Chris, and this is the place on the internet where I talk about comics, movies, games, and things I'm generally passionate about. So Marvel Rivals just launched. I'm having a great time. There's a lot of characters. If you've been online, you know a lot of people are having a great time with the player count shooting through the roof. Servers are great. You could jump right into a game. And as a DC fan and occasional Marvel hater, I started thinking, what would a DC Rivals look like? What if DC made their own hero shooter? Now, they tried to make their own looter shooter earlier this year with Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, and that was a bomb for more reasons than one. So we're going to talk about a fictional universe where DC made the right decision and gave NetEase the rights to create a hero shooter and a good game. So let's talk about it. So in this video, I'm just going to go through a few characters that I think would be good sort of comps to what we've seen in Marvel Rivals, and obviously Overwatch, which Marvel Rivals stole a lot, borrowed a lot from. So we'll talk about it. We'll go into things I think they can do in terms of what type of character they are, whether it be a damage, a support, or a tank. And then you just let me know if you like the video. Comment your favorite DC character that you would like to see in our hero shooter. So let's get into it. So first, we're going to go into Batman because Batman pays the bills. It's called DC Comics, Detective Comics. So we're going to talk about Batman. So with Batman, I think in terms of what you're looking at, I would think he would be very much like a Moon Knight. If you played Marvel Rivals, Moon Knight is a character that, is throwing moon crescents. His movement is pretty natural, and I think Batman will kind of play like that. I think the only thing that would separate Batman and Moon Knight is the fact that Batman has no powers whatsoever, no connection to a fictional god. So in terms of his ult, I think you would probably have to get pretty creative. I think it would be something like where when he pops his ult, it goes, there's a smoke bomb, and then he kills everyone. That would be my perfect Batman ult, because even with no powers, he definitely has these hands. Next, we're going to go into the second most popular character in DC, which would be Superman. Superman is about to have a moment. He's coming out with a movie next year. And with Superman, I think he's a hard character to kind of understand or sort of put into a hero shooter context because he has so many powers in his OP, which at times could be a little bit difficult when you're writing stories about him, but also when you're creating a game with him in. It's like, what powers do you use? Which ones do you kind of like limit a little bit? So it's hard to kind of find a comp with him, but I would think he would have range attacks like his heat vision, and then also he'll have, the way he moves around, he'd be flying obviously, and then he'll have some sort of super speed to kind of like travel around and stuff like that. I think he would have like a throw attack. It's just hard again for someone like Superman to kind of create something that's really balanced. It'd be cool to see if they used variants of Superman to sort of build something that was a little bit more comparable, or you compromise on his powers a little bit so that you have a character that's a little bit more balanced, or you just go crazy and just make him OP and have fun until you have to nerf him later in the game. And then we have the third person of the Trinity, which is Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman, I think, is a fun character, and there's a couple comps, like there's Magic in Marvel Rivals. So Magic has a sword and goes through portals. I think Wonder Woman, in terms of her attack, she would also be a damage. The way you could kind of go about her is that you'd really sort of, one, use speed, which I think would be really interesting. Also, she could really defend with her bracelet. And I would try to use the lasso, especially when it comes to closing the distance between enemies and really getting people in close. A little bit like the way Spider-Man uses his web to bring enemies closer in Marvel Rivals. A character I think is just as hard to kind of nail down as Superman would be the Flash. So with the Flash, whether you're going with Wally West or Barry Allen, is a god in a lot of ways, because super speed is incredibly difficult one to do in video games and I think in film, which is why we got the Flash movie. So obviously I think it would be tough to get that character right. I think in terms of his movement, obviously he'd be moving around a lot faster than most. I would think a little close to what Lucio does. And then I would maybe use sort of the speed force lightning that kind of radiates off him as a range attack, where you could kind of really throw those at people. Something I think would be cool, and then has like a really long cooldown time is something like him being able to phase through walls, especially like if you're able to see, enemies on the other side of a wall. So to get around and stuff like that. And I would have him, similar to Spider-Man where he could crawl on walls, I'll have the Flash run on wall. Yeah, overall, I think that's a tough character to kind of like put into a game like a rival style hero shooter just because he's just OP, just like Superman. And then I would say Aquaman. Aquaman, obviously the one-to-one comp would be Namor, especially the Namor that they're using in Marvel Rivals because he has his trident, which he throws around, which I would also use with Aquaman. I think in terms of close range combat, I would give Aquaman the hook hand, on top of having his trident. So you have that range and then you have something really close. And then obviously having some type of water abilities. Namor has those turrets that he could use, but I think Aquaman would be a force in a hero shooter type game. And then I would put Zatanna in it. In terms of magic users, I think Zatanna would be a really great addition to a Marvel Rivals type game. Zatanna, you could kind of look at as a mix between Doctor Strange and magic. I would use her wands and her spells. With Zatanna, I think you could put up portals. You could also put up turrets that I think using interesting things. I would use her in interesting ways, like especially with her hat, I would have things come out of it with spells like a giant bunny that attacks your enemies, and those kind of things. She has a wide range, and I think no one's really quite used her in video games, which is kind of sucky because she's an awesome character that I know people really love. And then another magic user I'll put in, and this, like Aquaman has a one-to-one comp, is Dr. Fate. Like literally just give him what Doctor Strange does in Marvel Rivals and you could call it a day. We have to put some villains in there. So we haven't gone into a tank. Now that I think about it, I think Superman would probably be a good tank. One tank that I think DC Rivals could have is Bane. Bane would be really cool. You could do something similar to what Marvel Rivals did with the Hulk, where you have a smaller version and a bigger version, but I would only go with the venomed out Bane, and then I would have like his special abilities have something where he has Berserker Rage, similar to what Wolverine does in Marvel Rivals. And we already had Aquaman, but I think Mira would be a really good addition to DC Rivals because you could have Mira being a support character, a healer, just because of the way she uses magic and water, so you could have her supporting the team while also having ranged attacks. She could throw water projectiles, like create water that are like daggers. Think that would be really cool, and especially supporting the team from long range and doling out heals. So Mira would be a really cool addition to the roster. I think I'm making all the villains tanks. So, if you have Superman, you have to have Lex Luthor. I would put Lex Luthor in the game, and I would have Lex Luthor in his mech suit and have him be sort of like the bigger version and have him dole out damage. You could have him use missiles. You also have mostly your like range attacks, but when he gets in close, you could do. He could also take in a lot of damage and put up shields for the team. So I think that would be a really interesting character and something developers could have a lot of fun with. And being that we're on the villains tip, you can't have Batman without the Joker. And Joker, I would sort of draw more comparisons to Overwatch, where I would have him be like a Junkrat type character where, he's causing havoc. He has interesting movement. I would use like bombs so that he could blow up and move around in terms of his traversal. He could have and then also have ranged attacks, maybe his long range, like 44 Magnum. That would be really cool. And like I said, I would play him a lot like Junkrat. From Joker, we could go right into Harley Quinn because Harley Quinn, it is a video game that you want people to buy. So Harley's one of the most popular DC characters around. So you have to have Harley around. I would give her mallet. It is hard to kind of think about what Harley would do because everything I'm kind of thinking about is what she does in Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League, which, I don't want to bring up too much because it brings up bad memories, but I would probably have something pretty close to that where her traversal is really fun and chaotic. She's really good in close range. She'd be really squishy because obviously she doesn't wear too much armor. And it would be cool, I think, if you're doing those combo attacks, have her and Joker have something really interesting. From Harley, again, we're transitioning really good right now. I would go to Poison Ivy. With Poison Ivy, you can have a lot of, she could also be a healer in terms of like what she's able to dole out, and then she could have range attacks and she could do stuff very similar to Groot. But I would focus more on her healing abilities, because everything I've been thinking about has been more damage, so we need some healers. So we have Miro, we have Poison Ivy, and hopefully I could think of some more. And I have a statue of him, a figure of him behind me, so we definitely got to go Nightwing. The name of this channel is Nightwing Stan, so Nightwing's got to be in the game. I'd probably play him closer to what Iron Fist is. Now, he's not the greatest hand-to-hand combat person in the DC universe, but he has batons, he has a nice ass, and then also like with Nightwing, I think you could also have, being that he's an acrobat, he would have like pretty fun movement in terms of getting around. He could climb up walls, similar to what Iron Fist does with like double jumps and those kind of things. If you're going to have Nightwing, you have to have Nightwing's number one hater, which is Deathstroke. Deathstroke just got announced in another game that we mentioned earlier that we're going to stop mentioning. And Deathstroke would be perfect for a hero shooter just because he is so versatile. Like, there's so many different ways developers could have fun with him, because he wields a sword. He's a master marksman. He has so many different abilities that you could kind of play around with. So there's so many different comps that you could even look at, like in terms of Marvel Rivals. You could go something closer to Punisher. You could go Black Panther in some ways, even Magic if you give him the giant sword that he had in some of the comics. So he's a fun character. And also in terms of like different costumes, you could go different iterations. You could have the Teen Titans one. You could have something closer to what he looked like in the Snyderverse. There's so many different ways you could go with that character, and developers could have a lot of fun. And he is, if he was ever put in a game like this, I think he would be suspect number one to being nerfed. Since we're on the Titans tip, let's talk about Raven. Raven is another magic user like Zatanna and Dr. Fate, but what's interesting about Raven, because she has so much dark magic, you could play her a lot like Scarlet Witch, and I already know what her alt is, and you can't really sort of, if you were to make this game and put Raven in it, you have to make her alt her summoning her father Trigon. That's just number one, has to happen. There's no debate about it. So I think if developers ever were to make it, that's, if they're going to put her in the game, that's what they need to do. I said I wasn't going to put the whole Justice League in it, and at this point, we're pretty close to putting the whole Justice League in it. But Martian Manhunter has so many different abilities. Now, his main ability, which is reading people's minds, is particularly tough in a game where you can't really control other people, but, you know, there's so many other abilities you could kind of play around with. His shape-shifting, so you could have him, like, have long range, like, melee attacks. Obviously he flies around. You could play around with his traversal and his movement, and also like the Flash, you could have him phase through walls and go through different places. So Martian Manhunter would be a really fun character, and you know, I just think of his cape and the way he would move around. I think in terms of his movement, he'd probably be a lot close to what Adam Warlock does in Marvel Rivals. Now I'm surprised it took me this long to get to this character, but Green Arrow would be a top candidate for like this Marvel Rivals style game, because one, you have a comp in Marvel Rivals, which is Hawkeye, and then two, you have a comp in Overwatch, which is Hanzo. So listen, you have to have an archer in these games. It's by law. Green Arrow, I think you could have a lot of fun with some of his, you know, abilities. You could obviously do the boxing glove arrow, which you have to do in some capacity, whether it be his ult or a side ability that, you know, has a cooldown. I would give him his crossbow just as like a side weapon that maybe he could switch between bow and arrow and his crossbow. So I think there's a lot of opportunity with that character, because guess what? Every one of these games has an archer. You just have to do it. It's a given. You can't avoid it. It must be done. Again, I think we're about to do the Justice League. Yeah, so Green Lantern. We just did Green Arrow, so we have to go with Green Lantern. I would put John Stewart in it. You'd have John like creating light constructs. Obviously, because John is probably one of the strongest Green Lanterns ever, I think you could get really creative with the constructs, being that he was in the military and then also an architect. Developers could have a lot of fun. You could do stuff like light turrets that you could create construct. Also, he could be sort of a tank because he can create shields for the team as well. So Green Lantern would be a great character to have in this DC Rivals. A fun character to put in, I think, would be, especially for fans of a younger age, would be Static Shock. Now, Static does not have a huge presence in the DC universe now. Also, it does not have hasn't had a huge presence, honestly, since the early 2000s when he had his animated series. Now there's been movies been trying to sort of get off the ground and stuff, but I think putting Static in a game like this, if it were to ever get made, one, would elevate that character. Two, remind people why Static is so cool. And then also, it's just awesome. Imagine being like Static and being able to move around the map on your trash can, electrocuting people. And there's so many different ways you kind of approach that character. And it just would be fun. That's more of like sort of like a wish fulfillment kind of thing of being able to play Static in a video game. But hey, I'm creating this fictional video game, so I'm putting Static in it. And that's it. That's my initial roster for DC Rivals. It's something I put together really quickly after playing the game and having a lot of fun. Like I said, day one, DC fan. I love DC, and I think DC games have sort of fallen off in a lot of ways where they were able to dominate it for years, that animation and TV, and Marvel's taken that over with games like Guardians of the Galaxy, which was awesome, the Spider-Man games, and now Marvel Rivals. So I think DC needs to step up their game and figure out how to get a partner to create a rival style game to get people really excited about the DC brand and be able to play their favorite characters and have fun and talk about DC characters. So what do you think? What are some characters that I forgot, or you think, hey, like that would suck to play? What are you thinking? Just let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, and peace.